It was a crisp spring morning at Jefferson Elementary School, nestled in a quiet suburb where life seemed to move at a gentle pace. The sun was just beginning to peek through the budding trees, casting long shadows across the playground as children laughed and rushed inside, backpacks bouncing with excitement for another day of learning. Detective Mark Reynolds, a seasoned officer with the local police department, was conducting a routine security sweep of the school grounds with his partner, a sleek German shepherd named Coda. The dog was well-trained, alert, and perceptive, often acting as the unseen guardian for hundreds of students each day. As they walked the perimeter, Coda's ears perked up and his pace slowed. His nostrils flared, pulling in a scent that was both familiar and unsettling. Reynolds followed his gaze toward the bench near the front gate, where an elderly man sat quietly, his weathered hands resting on a large canvas bag. The man's eyes scanned the horizon as if waiting for something or someone. Reynolds approached cautiously. "Good morning, sir. Are you waiting for someone?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The man looked up slowly, his eyes clear but guarded. "Yes," he replied softly, "my granddaughter. She attends this school." The officer's gaze shifted to the bag, resting on the ground beside the man's worn shoes. Something about the man's stillness, his careful posture, didn't sit right with Reynolds. Coda, sensing his handler's unease, suddenly stiffened, letting out a low growl that quickly escalated into barking. Reynolds put a hand on Coda's collar, but the dog would not be soothed. He pulled forward, alerting on the bag. "Sir, I'm going to need to take a look inside your bag," Reynolds said, his tone edged with authority. The man hesitated. His fingers tightened around the straps, his knuckles whitening. "There's nothing inside," he said, voice trembling just slightly. With a nod, Reynolds carefully unzipped the canvas bag. Inside, his breath caught, a collection of items that made no sense for someone simply waiting for a granddaughter. There were folded blueprints, clearly marked with the layouts of 3 different schools, including Jefferson Elementary itself. Several sets of fake-looking identification cards were scattered beneath them, alongside 2 disposable phones, unmarked glass vials filled with an unknown liquid, and a small, locked USB drive. Reynolds felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The man's calm facade cracked for a moment, his eyes darting nervously around the schoolyard. "Why do you have these?" Reynolds demanded. The man did not answer. At that moment, school staff gathered, alerted by the growing commotion. Principal Harris arrived, her face pale but composed. "What's going on?" she asked urgently. Reynolds turned to her. "We found some suspicious items in this man's bag. We're detaining him for questioning and notifying the FBI." Harris swallowed hard, nodding. She immediately ordered the school into lockdown. Teachers quickly moved classrooms into secured mode, doors locked, windows closed. The children, initially unaware of the unfolding situation, were soon hushed into uneasy silence as whispers circulated. Outside, the man sat quietly, his expression unreadable as officers handcuffed him and led him away. Coda remained at Reynolds' side, ears twitching and nose still twitching in the air. Something about this encounter was unlike anything they'd faced before. As the first FBI agents arrived on the scene, Reynolds watched the old man's eyes flicker briefly, a flash of something dark and knowing. He knew then this was no ordinary trespasser or lost grandfather. Something far more dangerous was unfolding at Jefferson Elementary that morning. The arrival of the FBI agents brought a new wave of intensity to Jefferson Elementary. Agents in dark suits, radios crackling quietly, fanned out across the school grounds. The elderly man, now sitting handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, remained silent, eyes fixed on the horizon as if lost in thought, or perhaps calculating his next move. Agent Lisa Monroe, a veteran of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, stepped forward. She had seen her share of suspicious individuals, but something about this case unsettled her from the start. She crouched down beside Detective Reynolds and examined the bag carefully. "We need a full inventory and forensic sweep," she ordered. "Every item, every fiber. This could be the tip of something much larger." Back inside the school's conference room, Monroe and her team laid out the contents of the bag like pieces on a chessboard. The blueprints were meticulously drawn, showing entrances, emergency exits, security camera placements, and even the timing of security patrols. Each school was detailed with almost obsessive precision. The fake IDs were disturbing. They weren't just poorly made forgeries. These were expertly crafted, with holograms, signatures, and photos that could easily fool casual inspection. Multiple aliases were represented, each tied to different states. Then there were the unmarked vials. Lab technicians rushed in and took samples, testing for toxins, explosives, or any hazardous substances. So far, the results were inconclusive but worrying. The potential for harm was there. Whatever was inside those vials was meant to be hidden. The locked USB drive became the focus of the forensic cyber team. Encrypted with what appeared to be military-grade software, breaking into it would take time. Hours, maybe days. Meanwhile, Monroe's phone buzzed incessantly with updates from other agencies. "We're pulling surveillance footage from the school and the surrounding neighborhood," a voice said through the earpiece. "So far, no signs of accomplices, but we've identified several vehicles that have been circling nearby over the last week." Agent Monroe frowned. This man didn't just show up out of nowhere. Across the hall, school officials were coordinating with local law enforcement to ensure the children remained calm and safe. Principal Harris was on the phone with distraught parents, doing her best to maintain order and reassure the community. Outside, news crews were starting to gather, flashing cameras capturing the black SUVs and uniformed officers. The story was quickly becoming national news. An elderly man with suspicious materials at an elementary school wasn't something people took lightly. As night fell, Monroe gathered the team. "We're looking at a possible coordinated plot," she said. "The blueprints show schools across at least 3 states. The fake IDs suggest multiple identities and mobility. And those files. We can't rule out chemical agents." Detective Reynolds shook his head. "But why an elderly man? Why here? Why now?" Monroe's eyes hardened. "Because he's smart, he's underestimated, and he's just the first piece in a much larger puzzle." The man remained silent through interrogations. His age, his calm demeanor, and the lack of any digital footprint made it impossible to trace him. His only connection to Jefferson Elementary was the claim of a granddaughter, yet no student matched that description, and no relatives could be found. With the USB still locked tight, the FBI's cyber team intensified their efforts. Time was slipping away. Monroe looked out the window at the locked-down school, the quiet halls now shadows of fear and uncertainty. This was no random act. It was a warning, and the country was about to learn just how fragile their safety really was. The elderly man's silence was deafening. Despite hours of questioning, he offered nothing. Not a name, not a motive, not even a hint about the strange items found in his bag. His calm, inscrutable expression seemed almost rehearsed, as if he had prepared for this moment his entire life. Agent Lisa Monroe sat across from him in the dim interrogation room at the FBI field office. The cold fluorescent light above flickered slightly, casting shadows across the man's lined face. His eyes, sharp and calculating despite his age, locked onto hers, but his lips remained sealed. "What's your name?" Monroe asked again, voice steady but firm. The man's eyes flickered briefly, but no answer came. Monroe's frustration grew, but she wasn't about to give up. Outside, her team worked furiously to unravel the mystery of his identity. Forensic analysts ran his fingerprints through every national database. Criminal records, military files, immigration records, nothing. The man simply didn't exist. Even his physical description was problematic. He had no distinguishing scars or tattoos, no medical implants or markers. He carried no wallet, no personal effects beyond that suspicious bag. Detective Reynolds, sitting nearby, shared the frustration. "It's like he's a ghost," he muttered. "No paper trail, no history." Then came a breakthrough. A local police officer who had responded to the scene called Monroe with an unusual detail. The logo on one of those blueprints, on the schools is an old insignia. Jefferson Elementary hasn't used it in over 15 years. Monroe's brow furrowed. So this man's been watching schools a long time. The team began to piece together a chilling theory. The man wasn't some random trespasser. He was a careful, deliberate observer with a history. Digging deeper into archives and historical records, the FBI found surveillance footage from a protest in the early 1990s, a violent demonstration that turned deadly. Among the masked faces, a younger version of the elderly man was caught on camera, his face partially obscured but recognizable to those who knew him. He was part of a radical extremist group known as the Ember Front, a cell notorious for eco-terrorism, sabotage, and bombings. Though the group had supposedly disbanded years ago, Monroe's gut told her otherwise. The careful planning shown in the blueprints, the fake identities, and the encrypted files all hinted at an active operation, one that had been in the works for decades. "We're not just dealing with a trespasser or a lone wolf," Monroe said quietly during a briefing. "This is a coordinated cell, and this man is likely one of its last remaining operatives." The FBI began searching for any recent activity linked to the Ember Front. They uncovered a series of untraceable burner phone calls pinging off towers near schools across 3 states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Oregon. The calls were brief, often at odd hours, but enough to suggest communication between multiple players. Monroe felt a heavy weight settle on her shoulders. The man's presence at Jefferson Elementary was no accident. It was a signal, a calculated risk to test the waters. But for what? Back in the interrogation room, the man's silence remained unbroken. When pressed, he only gave a faint smile, an unsettling hint that he knew more than he was willing to share. Agent Monroe knew the clock was ticking. The longer they waited, the closer the threat came to fruition. Outside, Coda the K9 sat alert, as if sensing the growing danger. The man they detained was not just an old stranger. He was the calm before the storm. And the storm was coming fast. Back at the FBI Cyber Lab, Agent Sarah Kim hovered over her computer screen with laser focus. The locked USB drive, cold and unassuming, sat in a secure container next to her. It was as if the device itself held the keys to a mystery far beyond anything the Bureau had encountered in years. Weeks of work by the nation's top cyber experts had reduced the drive to a digital lockbox that seemed impenetrable. Military-grade encryption algorithms wrapped around it like steel chains. But Sarah wasn't about to give up. Using every tool in the Bureau's arsenal, advanced decryption software, AI algorithms, brute force hacking, she was determined to crack it. Suddenly, her screen flickered. A folder appeared. Phase 2. Countdown. Sarah's pulse quickened. Carefully, she clicked inside. Files began to unfold. Blueprints, more detailed than the ones found in the man's bag, mapped out dozens of schools across multiple states, each tagged with times, security patrol schedules, and access codes. Alongside were video surveillance logs showing clear footage of security cameras, some seemingly installed without the knowledge of the schools themselves. Sarah called in Agent Monroe. "You need to see this." Monroe leaned over the screen, eyes scanning the intricate web of files. "This is not just planning," she said, voice grim. "They've been monitoring these schools for months, maybe years. This is organized, methodical surveillance." One video caught her attention, a night vision clip of a figure crawling through the ventilation ducts of a school in Portland. The figure paused, disabling a camera with practiced ease before disappearing into the shadows. It was evidence that these weren't just empty threats. Beside the files was a chilling document, a list of names with code names beside them. Locations were marked: rural warehouses, urban safe houses, and dates. The list hinted at rendezvous points, supply drops, and possibly planned attacks. It was the backbone of a network. Monroe's mind raced. "These aren't just school attacks," she said. "This is a nationwide operation. They've chosen targets across at least 5 states." The vials found in the man's bag became a critical point of investigation. Initial lab tests had been inconclusive, but now agents were sending samples to specialized federal labs. The fear was growing. Were these chemical agents, biological weapons, or something even more dangerous? Meanwhile, Monroe reached out to the Department of Homeland Security and local school districts, urging immediate reviews of security protocols. Lockdown drills, surveillance enhancements, and increased K-9 patrols were ordered in vulnerable districts. But the clock was running out. The encrypted files also contained coded messages, difficult to decode but suggesting a timeline, something ominous labeled simply countdown. The meaning was unclear, but the threat was unmistakable. In the field, FBI teams increased surveillance on persons of interest, while local police intensified patrols around schools mentioned in the files. The media picked up the story, spreading anxiety across communities, parents fearful for their children's safety. At the heart of it all was the elderly man, still silent in custody. Interrogators had tried everything: psychological tactics, appeals, even playing back videos from the USB files to see if he'd react. But he remained a fortress of secrecy. Who was he protecting? Monroe wondered aloud. And who else is out there? The FBI's National Task Force was now fully mobilized. What had started as a routine school security check had snowballed into a complex investigation involving decades-old extremist cells, encrypted digital dossiers, and a sprawling network of suspects. And the key to stopping it all lay hidden inside that stubborn USB drive, a drive that shouldn't have existed but did. A digital Pandora's box threatening to unleash chaos. Monroe glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away. The countdown had begun. The small town of Portland, Oregon, was far from the chaos unfolding on the national stage, or so the residents believed. But beneath its quiet streets and leafy suburbs, danger had already taken root. 2 days after the FBI's revelations, an arrest rocked a local high school. A janitor named Carl Jenkins was taken into custody in a pre-dawn raid. At first glance, Jenkins seemed like an unremarkable man, quiet, polite, and diligent. But the FBI had discovered his true identity was a fabrication, part of a network operating under deep cover. School administrators had grown suspicious when security cameras caught Jenkins lingering near restricted areas. Maintenance closets he should never have accessed, rooms where he wasn't scheduled to work, small oddities that didn't add up. On the morning of his arrest, Jenkins had been found near the science wing, carrying a suspicious duffel bag. Officers found a cache of tools inside: lockpicks, wire cutters, and small electronic devices capable of hacking security systems. More troubling were burner phones with recent calls to untraceable numbers registered in rural Pennsylvania, one of the areas mentioned in the FBI's decrypted files. Interrogators wasted no time. Jenkins, confronted with evidence, initially denied everything. But as agents pressed him with names, dates, and locations, cracks appeared. He admitted to working with a group dedicated to disrupting systems, though he insisted he wasn't involved in violence. The FBI wasn't convinced. Monroe watched the interrogation through the glass, her mind racing. Jenkins' confession confirmed their fears. This was not a rogue operator, but part of a larger, organized network. His knowledge of school security systems, combined with the encrypted messages on the USB drive, painted a disturbing picture. They've embedded themselves inside the system, Monroe said to Detective Reynolds. People we trust, teachers, janitors, staff, could be compromised. Jenkins' arrest triggered a domino effect. Investigations in other states uncovered similar cases. Individuals with fake identities slipping into schools as staff or contractors. Many had passed background checks with suspicious ease, their records wiped or forged. In Pennsylvania, a local police chief reported suspicious activity at a rural warehouse matching one of the rendezvous points from the USB files. Surveillance footage showed deliveries of unmarked crates, but no one dared approach. As Jenkins awaited transfer to a federal detention center, the question lingered: how deep did the infiltration go? Meanwhile, the elderly man from Jefferson Elementary remained an enigma. Despite Jenkins' confession, he offered no new information. If anything, His silence grew more impenetrable, as if he was guarding a secret far greater than the FBI could imagine. The public's anxiety mounted. News headlines screamed about the school infiltration and shadow network. Parents demanded answers. School boards scrambled to tighten security, installing new cameras, screening staff more rigorously, and increasing police presence. But Monroe knew they were only seeing the surface. Their plans are bigger than we thought, she told her team. This isn't just about one school or one attack. It's a coordinated, nationwide threat. Late one night, as Monroe reviewed intercepted phone records, a new name appeared, an alias linked to multiple burner phones across states. It was someone unknown, yet connected to the entire network. The chase was far from over. And somewhere, in the shadows, the real mastermind was still watching. Agent Lisa Monroe sat in the dim glow of her office monitor, the hum of activity from the FBI operations center a distant backdrop. The encrypted phone record she had uncovered felt like a thread, thin, fragile, but promising. The mysterious alias appeared repeatedly across multiple burner phones linked to the network, always at odd hours and in fleeting moments. Whoever this is, they're the nerve center, Monroe said, rubbing her temples. Detective Reynolds pulled up surveillance footage from a recent sting operation in Pennsylvania. The video showed a shadowy figure slipping into a nondescript warehouse, carrying a heavy case. The figure's face was obscured, but their movements were calculated and precise. Monroe's instincts screamed. This was no low-level player. This was someone who orchestrated the entire network from the shadows. The FBI cyber team worked around the clock to break down the layers of encryption protecting the USB drive. At last, Agent Sarah Kim cracked a segment, an audio file, distorted but recognizable. "It's a voice recording," Sarah said, turning up the volume. "Sounds like a meeting, a planning session." Through the static, a man's voice emerged, calm but resolute. "Phase 2 begins at midnight next Friday. Targets are secured. Deploy the agents." The room fell silent. The threat was no longer vague. They had a date, and it was less than a week away. Monroe called an emergency briefing. Federal agents, local law enforcement, and school officials gathered, tension thick in the air. "We have a deadline," Monroe announced. "This network is mobilizing for an attack. We don't know the exact nature yet, but it's coming soon." Plans were set into motion. Schools across 5 states initiated lockdown drills, increased security patrols, and deployed K-9 units like CODA to sniff out threats. Agents fanned out to surveil suspected safe houses and individuals linked to the network. But the network's reach was vast and elusive. Every step forward felt matched by a step back as encrypted communications morphed, burner phones disappeared, and safe houses emptied overnight. Monroe stayed in constant contact with local police chiefs, school principals, and federal task forces. Each new piece of intelligence revealed the operation was more sophisticated than anyone imagined. The elderly man still in custody had become a puzzle piece the FBI couldn't place. Yet one night, during a rare moment alone with a senior interrogator, he finally spoke just a single word: ashes. The interrogator frowned. "Ashes? What does that mean?" The man's eyes flickered, then closed as if conserving energy. No further explanation came. Monroe pored over historical files, recalling the extremist group the Ember Front, and remembered something from a decade-old case. Their symbol was a stylized ash tree, representing rebirth through destruction. "Ashes, it's a clue," Monroe said to Reynolds. Meanwhile, CODA's handler noticed the dog's unusual behavior during a sweep of a nearby abandoned factory once linked to the Ember Front. CODA barked furiously near a concealed door, pawing at the floorboards. Officers pried the door open, revealing a hidden basement filled with crates marked with symbols matching those on the USB drive. Inside, containers held chemical compounds, some matching the vials found in the elderly man's bag. The realization hit hard. The network wasn't just planning an attack, they were already arming themselves with dangerous materials. With the clock ticking closer to midnight Friday, The FBI was racing against time. Every second counted in unraveling the mystery of Ashes and stopping the network before disaster struck. The days leading up to midnight Friday were a blur of frantic activity. Agent Lisa Monroe barely slept, her mind a whirlwind of encrypted codes, shadowy suspects, and the looming threat hovering over the nation's schools. The operation had escalated from investigation to urgent counterterrorism, with every federal, state, and local agency working in tandem. At the FBI Command Center, screens glowed with live feeds from surveillance cameras, intercepted communications, and real-time GPS tracking of persons of interest. The entire network was under unprecedented scrutiny, but the mastermind, known only by the alias Ashes, remained elusive. Meanwhile, the elderly man, still stone-faced in custody, had become the FBI's most vital puzzle piece. Despite repeated interrogations, he offered only cryptic clues and a haunting phrase whispered in moments of fatigue. "The fire cleanses." Monroe felt the weight of those words. They echoed the extremist group, the Ember Front's ideology of destruction and rebirth. But how far were they willing to go? In Pennsylvania, agents had intensified their watch on the rural warehouses where chemical compounds were found. The fear was growing that these materials could be weaponized into an attack too devastating to imagine. Suddenly, a breakthrough came from the cyber division. Agent Sarah Kim cracked the final layer of encryption on a portion of the USB drive, a detailed map pinpointing multiple schools as targets, each with precise timing schedules. The plan was chilling in its precision. Simultaneous attacks meant to overwhelm first responders and spread terror nationwide. Monroe's phone buzzed relentlessly with updates from field agents. Suspects spotted near Jefferson Elementary. One message read, "Possible link to Ashes." The elderly man's presence at the original school was no accident. It was a test run, a dry run for the real attack. With hours left before midnight, the FBI coordinated lockdowns and evacuations of the schools on the map. Parents were frantic, the media frantic, and everywhere tension crackled like electricity. Outside one targeted school in Ohio, Coda and his handler conducted a thorough sweep. The dog's alert barking led agents to a hidden compartment beneath the playground, a stash of improvised explosive devices and more chemical vials. The pieces were falling into place. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. The elderly man broke his silence. In a low, gravelly voice, he confessed something that sent a shockwave through the FBI. "There is one among you, a sleeper," he said, eyes burning with intensity. "They move in shadows. They wear faces you trust." The room fell silent. Monroe's heart pounded. They had uncovered a network, but there was a traitor inside the very agencies charged with stopping it. The revelation shattered the fragile sense of security the FBI had worked so hard to build. Was Ashes one of their own? A mole? Or worse, a collaborator embedded deep in the system? Time was running out. The midnight deadline was fast approaching. As the nation held its breath, Monroe rallied every resource at her disposal. They had to stop the attacks before the clock ran out. But could they? Or had Ashes already lit the fuse? Midnight loomed like a shadow over the nation's schools, a countdown echoing in the minds of thousands. Agent Lisa Monroe's eyes scanned the glowing monitors, every heartbeat pounding with urgency. The network's plans were laid bare, but one question gnawed her: who was the sleeper? In a secure conference room, Monroe gathered her closest team. "We have a mole," she announced grimly. "Someone feeding information to Ashes." The room erupted with disbelief and suspicion. Who could it be? Surveillance teams began scrutinizing their own ranks, cross-checking communications, and tracking unauthorized data access. It was a race against time and trust. Suddenly, a name surfaced: Special Agent Mark Holden, a veteran with deep ties in counterterrorism. Records revealed encrypted messages traced back to him, messages carefully disguised but unmistakably linked to the network. Monroe's stomach twisted. Holden had been part of the initial investigation, guiding efforts, gaining trust. Now he was the prime suspect. A covert operation was launched. Agents moved to apprehend Holden quietly to avoid tipping off the network. They found him packing a bag in his office, a dark look in his eyes. "Why?" Monroe demanded during the tense standoff. Holden's reply was chilling. "You don't understand the vision. Ashes isn't destruction, it's renewal. A purge for a broken system. I'm here to make sure it happens." Before the arrest could be finalized, Holden lunged for a hidden pistol. A swift response from agents disarmed and detained him, ending the threat inside the bureau. With Holden in custody, the FBI had a critical advantage. Under intense interrogation, he revealed details of the network's final plan: simultaneous chemical attacks targeting multiple schools designed to incite panic and chaos nationwide. Armed with this intelligence, federal and local law enforcement coordinated rapid evacuations and raids on safe houses. K-9 units like CODA led teams to hidden caches of chemicals and explosives, neutralizing threats before they could be deployed. At Jefferson Elementary, where it all began, parents gathered anxiously as children were safely evacuated. The elderly man, now identified through forensic breakthroughs as Raymond Cross, a former extremist turned informant, offered a final cryptic warning. "Sometimes the shadows protect us," he said quietly. "But light always finds a way." The nationwide manhunt culminated with the capture of several key operatives, dismantling the network piece by piece. Thanks to the coordinated efforts of law enforcement and the unwavering vigilance of CODA the K-9, the planned attacks were thwarted. In the aftermath, communities breathed a collective sigh of relief. Security measures were overhauled, trust in local institutions rebuilt, and the FBI lauded for their relentless pursuit of justice. For Agent Monroe, the case was a somber reminder. Vigilance never sleeps, and sometimes the greatest threats come from within. As CODA rested after the long ordeal, Monroe looked out over the quiet school grounds, hope flickering in her eyes. The nation had been tested, and it had endured.